So for this lesson, I'm going to go under the assumption that you already have an okay knowledge of open chords, like your G and your C and your D and stuff like that. If you don't, check out my chord series, which I'm going to link on screen just now. Get familiar with most of those open chords, and then you can come back here. Because for the sake of time, I'm not really going to explain the fingering for some basic chords. So we'll start off for the intro by playing a G chord. But with our pick, we're only going to play the low E, A, D and G strings. We're not going to play the B or high E. So technically you could leave these fingers off and not actually bother putting them down at all, since we're not going to play them. But if you feel more comfortable just putting down a full G chord, go for it. Then we're going to play this little lick. So for that, we're going to play the 4th fret on the G string with our 3rd finger, then the 2nd fret with our 1st finger, then an open G, and then we're going to put our 1st finger back on the 2nd fret, but we're going to play an open D and then the G strings together. So that whole part will be... Next wee bit after that, we're going to do that same little 4-2 open part. But this time we're going to play the bottom 3 strings of an E minor chord. So I'll be playing the low E, A and D strings. Then we go back to that little 4-2 open riff. Back to playing an open D and the 2nd fret on the G strings again. So altogether, everything we have so far. Then we're going to play the 4th fret on the G string on its own. Move our 3rd finger forward a fret, so now we're playing the 5th fret. Move our 3rd finger 1 string towards the floor, so now we're playing the 5th fret of the B string. So that wee bit will be... Now if I put everything together in that intro so far, we'll get this. Now to start off the verse, we're going to play another G chord. But this is a kind of special fingering of a G chord. You may or may not already be familiar with it. For this one, we're going to put our 3rd finger on the 3rd fret of the B string, as well as our normal 2 on the bottom strings. We're not going to play the high E string though, so we don't actually need to worry about that string just now. We're just going to run our pick down from the low E to the B string. This kind of starts the verse, but it's also kind of the end of the last lick in the intro. So once we've strummed that chord, we want to let some of those open strings ring out while we start the next phrase. So for this wee bit, we're going to play the open B string, then the 1st fret on the B string with our 1st finger, and then an open B again. Then we're going to put our 1st finger on the 2nd fret of the G string and our 3rd finger on the 3rd fret of the B string. This is kind of like playing a D chord. We're going to play the open D and G strings together, have a little pause, and then while those strings are ringing out, play the 3rd fret on the B string. So that whole bit together will be. After that, we're going to go to a C chord. And we're going to play the A, then D, then G strings. And we want all of those strings to ring out once we move on to the next one. So we're not going for a kind of noise, okay? We want all those strings ringing out. And while those strings are ringing out, we're going to play the 1st fret on the B string twice, and then lift our 1st finger off and play an open B string twice. So that whole bit will sound like. And if I put that together with everything from the start of this section, we would get. And then to finish off, we're going to put our 1st finger back on the 2nd fret of the G string and play the D and G strings together. We're going to do that twice. So for the next wee bit, we're going to play an open low E string, then the 2nd fret with our 1st finger, and then the 3rd fret with our 2nd finger. Now while that 3rd fret is ringing out, we're going to play an open D and then an open G string. So altogether that will sound like. Now while those 2 middle strings are ringing out, we're going to play a lot of the same stuff that we played in the last little bit. So all of that just kind of repeats. Then we can go into the next section. So for this, we're going to play an open A string, then the 2nd fret with our 2nd finger, and then the 3rd fret with our 3rd finger. At this point, it's probably a good idea to put your other fingers down to play a C chord, but we're not actually going to strum a full C chord yet. So far we have. And once we've got our fingers down for that C chord, we're going to play the D string. So we play in the 2nd fret, and then an open G. We're going to let those strings ring out. Now while those strings are all ringing out, we're going to play an open high E string 3 times. So that'll be. Then we're going to put down a D chord, and we're going to only strum the D, G, and B strings, and then play the G string on its own. But keeping our 1st finger on that 2nd fret on the G string, we're not lifting anything off. So altogether, that'll be. And then to finish this wee bit off, we're going to play an open B, and then the 1st fret. That'll take us in at the next wee bit. So all of that so far together will sound like... Now this next part is probably the hardest bit in the whole song, I think. So if we can get through this, we'll have the rest of it no problem. So this wee bit sounds like... So we're going to put our 2nd finger on the 3rd fret of the low E string, and we're just going to hover our 1st finger over the G string at the 2nd fret. We don't need to actually put it down there just now, we're just going to hover it about that part of the world, because we're going to need that in a wee second. So what we're going to do here is play the low E string at the 3rd fret, then the D string, and then the B string twice. Remember, let all those strings ring out. And then while those strings are ringing out, we're going to put our 1st finger onto the 2nd fret of the G string and play the D and G strings together. Then get our 3rd finger onto the 3rd fret of the B string. It's quite a tricky wee change. It's kind of as if we're going from a G to a D chord there. And then we're going to go to an E minor chord, but we're only going to strum the low E, A, D and G strings, so only the bottom 4. So one more time, that whole section. And now we're on to the last little bit. So that will sound like... So for this wee bit, we're going to play 3 individual notes. So we're going to start off with an open G, then the 2nd fret on the G string with our 2nd finger, then an open B. Then we're going to put down a C chord, but we're only going to play the A, D, G and B strings. So we're not going to play that high E string. So that wee bit all together will sound like... And then while those notes are all still ringing out, we're going to play the B string again, and then lift our 1st finger off, play an open B. Then we're going to put our 1st finger onto the 2nd fret of the G string again, as if we're going to play a D chord. And we're going to play the D and G strings together 3 times. So that's going to be twice, then a little pause, then the 3rd time. 1, 2, pause, 3. And then to finish off, we're going to play the open D and then open G strings. So one more time, that whole bit. Then B1 to open B, 2 middle strings. And then you could start the whole thing all over again if you wanted to at that point. So now let's put all of those bits together. Nice and slowly, we'll stick a metronome on, and you and me together will try and play through the whole thing. Ready, steady, and ready, steady, ready, play. Then play. Then play. Then play. Then then the next bit, then play, and then the next bit, then play, and then we'll play, then play,